Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Playing with Fire by April Henry, narrated by Amy Mcfadden. Chapter 1, Blanket of Fire, 6:22 p.m. When Jason and Brian had scouted this stretch of road in the middle of the week, it had been empty. But now, early on a Saturday evening, Jason counted a half-dozen parked cars. The lot for the nearby trail to Basin Falls must be full. Only Brian's plan had called for parking here, and he had made it clear that Jason shouldn't deviate from the plan. And, so far, Brian's plan was going like clockwork. So Jason found a spot. Before he got out, he cranked down the windows. Then he opened up the back of the little 1984 Chevette he had bought off Craigslist. $400 cash. $300 for the car, and another $100 for not asking questions. Later, Jason had destroyed the burner phone he'd used to arrange the deal. The trunk of the hatchback was empty, except for a single road flare. After he retrieved it, Jason looked up and down the road, but didn't see anyone. He walked around the car until it was between him and the road. He pulled the lid off the white cap to expose the coarse red striking surface. Then he twisted off the cap. He took a slow breath, trying to steady his nerves. Then, in a single fast movement, he struck the black button on the end of the flare across the coarse red surface on the plastic cap, like striking a giant match. It lit with a hiss and a shower of sparks, reminding him of fireworks. He tossed it into the back seat, the way Brian had said. And now he was supposed to walk away. Walk back down the road to where it joined up with the bigger road. Brian would pick him up. And meanwhile, their getaway car would turn into a fireball, destroying any prints and DNA they had left. But what if the flare guttered and went out? A flame started on the stained fabric of the seat, then began to inch up the back. It felt like magic. He had just created it out of nothing. Now it danced and moved like a living thing. The flames were yellow in the center, then orange, and finally red at the edges. Smoke was beginning to billow out of the car. A breeze blew through the driver's side window and pushed the flames toward the middle of the seat. The smoke was turning from gray to black. It tasted acrid. Jason stepped back, coughing, still reluctant to walk away. What if someone showed up with a fire extinguisher and put it out? The flames reached out of the car, up past the roof. Inside, the headliner caught. It fell, a blanket of fire. Boom! The back glass of the hatchback shattered, and a piece of metal shot toward him. It landed in the dry weeds, and suddenly they were on fire as well. Suddenly everything was on fire. Jason turned and ran, trying to get ahead of the flames. Chapter 2, Ribbon of Scar, 6:24 p.m. A flat pop split the hot summer air. It sounded far away, but also out of place. Natalia heard it, even over the rush of the waterfall. She lifted her head from the beach towel they had spread out on a wide, flat boulder. What was that? Next to her, Wyatt, who had been half asleep, pushed himself up on his elbows. His eyebrows pulled together. It almost sounded like a rifle shot. But it's not hunting season, right? Natalia was pretty sure hunting season was in the fall, and not in the middle of a scorching August. No, it's not. Wyatt was still listening, head tilted, hazel eyes narrowed, but the sound wasn't repeated. Had anyone else heard it? A couple of hikers still at Basin Falls were also starting toward the trail that led back to the parking lot, less than 2 miles away. But most seemed to have noticed nothing. A pitted-out plump guy in his late 20s was drinking a Gatorade on the sun-warmed rocks. A college-age girl was taking a selfie with the falls in the background, while her boyfriend threw a stick for his medium-sized brown dog. 30 feet from them, a mom and dad were putting their toddler into a backpack-like contraption. Wyatt finally relaxed. Sounds can carry weird out here. He shrugged. What time is it, anyway? Natalia checked her phone. 6:25. Even though the corner of the display had shown the same thing since they left the parking lot to start the hike here, it was still disconcerting to see 0 bars and the words, "no service." Oops, I must have drifted off. Wyatt picked up his socks. We should get going. Even though it's an easy trail, we don't want to be on it after dark. Natalia didn't think it had been all that easy. What with the roots and rocks and being uphill. Sunset was still nearly 2 hours away, but it had taken them almost an hour to hike here. Wyatt reached for his hiking boots, scuffed with use. She did the same, wishing she didn't have to put hers back on. They were so hot and heavy, and because they were brand new, they had already left a red spot on one toe. And had she really needed them? Some people had made it here in Tevis. The girl taking a selfie was actually wearing flip-flops. Natalia had considered this a trip to the wilderness and prepared accordingly. Maybe it had been overkill to buy the hiking boots and the emergency supplies. It had certainly been expensive, way more than she'd expected. After Natalia finished tying her boots, Wyatt pulled her to her feet. Although they had spent hours next to each other this summer, it was the first time they had deliberately touched. She was aware of his slightly calloused palm, his strong fingers, but he released her hand as soon as she was up. Natalia couldn't quite figure Wyatt out. She thought he liked her, but today he'd treated her just like a friend, which was what they had become at the dairy barn this summer. Coworkers and friends, handing out samples on tiny blue plastic spoons, joking as they packed ice cream into cones, bumping hips in the small space behind the counter. And then last week, Wyatt had found out that Natalia had never been hiking. What? Never? This is Portland. He widened his eyes dramatically. The place where babies are born wearing Gore-Tex and hiking boots. People come from all over the world to hike the Columbia Gorge. You live less than an hour away, and you've managed to go 17 years without even taking a day hike? Sorry. With a half smile, she hung her head, savoring his attention. What about outdoor school? In Portland, most fifth graders attended outdoor school, where they stayed in cabins, tramped around in the woods, and learned about nature. I was sick that week. That was one way of putting it. Natalia had been in a hospital, sedated. And my parents aren't really the outdoor adventure type. We're going to have to fix that, Wyatt had said. Which was why they were now scrambling up the hill and back to the trail. Natalia took one last look at the falls. She had to admit they were beautiful. White water poured over the lip of the basin to splash 30 feet into what nature and time had turned into a natural swimming hole. The rush of water was nearly hypnotic. They reached the trail. It had been carved into the side of a valley that sloped down to a creek. Above them, evergreens stretched to the sky. The slanted hillside was carpeted with ferns and other small green plants. The space felt immense, big and open, capped only by the bright blue sky. The way back was mostly downhill. Natalia had been looking forward to it, thinking it would be easier, but momentum actually seemed to be working against her. She felt off balance. With each step, her ankles wobbled and her knees protested. And then she stepped on a loose rock. Her right foot started to slip. As her arms pinwheeled, her stomach crammed into the back of her throat. Natalia lurched to the right, toward the creek. For a split second, she saw how it would all end, with her body tumbling down the steep slope to rest broken and bloody by the water far below. Then Wyatt caught her wrist and pulled her back. Whoa there! I thought going downhill would be easier. She was gasping. It seems like it should be, doesn't it? He gave her a sympathetic grin. The trick is to keep your knees bent and take short steps. Try to keep your weight centered. Don't lean forward or back. They started off again. Natalia's steps were now so short they were more of a shuffle. Whenever Wyatt realized she had fallen behind, he stopped and waited patiently. His gray t-shirt didn't even look wet under the arms. All of Natalia's skin was slick. Sweat was actually dripping off the ends of her hair. She couldn't wait to get home and jump into the shower. Maybe her parents were right. They thought being trapped in the middle of the woods without electricity, running water, or a car was reserved for survivors of the apocalypse, or at least a plane crash. Certainly not something anyone with sense would choose. Coming up the trail toward them was a dark-haired white guy in his 30s. He wore a black ball cap, dark cargo pants, and a black t-shirt that showed off his muscles, and a long, fresh scratch on one arm. He glanced back over his shoulder a couple of times, but the path behind him was empty. Earlier, Wyatt had told Natalia that trail etiquette dictated whoever was going uphill had the right of way, so she stepped aside. The other guy was moving fast, nearly jogging. Even though he was getting a late start, at his pace he would still have time to make it to the falls, admire them, and then turn around and beat Wyatt and Natalia back. As he passed, he gave them a nod, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses. In one hand was what looked like the top to a bottle, but his other hand was empty. When Natalia caught up with Wyatt for what seemed like the 1,000th time, a scent tickled her nose. She stopped in her tracks. Smoke. But not from a cigarette. It smelled like a campfire. "Do you smell that?" Wyatt sniffed the air. "The Cougar Creek fire's still burning." At the word fire, a sour taste spread across Natalia's tongue. Memories crowded into her thoughts, but she pushed them away. "There's a fire?" "It's been burning for a couple of weeks. It's about 70% contained. Didn't you see the helicopters carrying those gigantic buckets of flame retardant when we were driving here?" "I saw them, but I guess I didn't think about what they were for." "We're in the middle of a drought." Wyatt's mouth twisted. "That's why I was worried that sound might have been a rifle shot. A lot of people go shooting in the gorge, and some of them aren't that careful. But these woods are tinder dry. If they use exploding targets, or a bullet sparked against a rock, it could cause a fire." Despite the heat, Natalia shivered. Her hand went to the back of one pant leg. Through the cloth, her fingers traced the ribbon of scar on her left thigh. Trying to reassure herself, she said, "But it's so green." She waved a hand to indicate the dark evergreens, the brighter green ferns and plants. "All this green can turn into fuel if the conditions are right." He saw her expression. "Don't worry, we're almost back to the car, and that fire is several miles away." They kept walking down the trail, their boots thudding softly. Her stomach growled, despite the sandwiches they had eaten only an hour ago. Maybe they could stop at a drive-thru on their way back to Portland. Focused on her feet, she almost ran into Wyatt's back. He had stopped short. His head was up, and when she stepped to the side to look at his face, his eyes were wide. "What's the matter?" Everything looked just the way it had before. Then Natalia realized it wasn't what Wyatt was seeing. It was what he was hearing. A rumbling. "What is that?" Instead of answering, he broke into a jog, disappearing around a turn in the path. More slowly, Natalia followed. The air was starting to look cloudy, misty. When she rounded the corner, she felt the heat on her skin. Now, smoke was everywhere. Natalia blinked, as if it were a mirage, but what she saw didn't go away. Several 100 yards ahead, the woods were on fire. The woods they needed to go through. Chapter 3. True, but not the truth. 6:59 p.m. Natalia put her hand over her mouth. The fire moved like a living thing, like a dancer, like water, like a torn and fluttering flag. It crackled and snapped as it crisped and then consumed ferns and wildflowers and plants she didn't know the names of. It wasn't a solid wall of flame. Some spots were still green, while in others the fire was thick, flaring up as it found new fuel, filling the air with pale smoke. The flickering orange and yellow was a sharp contrast to the bright green ground cover. The flames were nibbling on the trunks of some of the small trees that bordered the trail, but hadn't leapt into the canopies. Yet. Natalia's throat was tight, her breathing shallow. For the past 6 years she had avoided even the smallest of fires. Matches, lighters, birthday candles, smoldering incense, and, of course, bigger things like fire pits and fireplaces. Now her nightmares had come to life. Slowly, she became aware Wyatt was repeating her name. "Natalia. Natalia, are you okay?" She was not okay. She was back to being 11 years old, gasping in the smoke. "I'm afraid of fire." In her mind, she was again crawling across the flat tan carpet, coughing and gagging. Wyatt put his hand under her chin, turning her head so she was facing him and not the flames. At first she resisted, the muscles in her neck rigid, before yielding to the gentle pressure of his fingers. Their eyes locked. This time when he grabbed her hand, he squeezed and didn't let go.
"Listen to me. We're going to be okay, but we can't stay here. We're going to go back to the falls. It's got that rocky beach with no trees nearby, and all that water. We'll be safe there."
"But what about the fire?" He surveyed the flames with narrowed eyes.
"It's not that far from the parking lot. Someone's probably already called 911. If the Forest Service could divert a single helicopter with one of those giant buckets of fire retardant, they could nip this thing in the bud."
But what if they didn't know about the fire? Natalia checked her phone, but it still read no service. As she slid it back into her pocket, Wyatt said,
"I think if I climbed up above the falls, I might be able to get a bar or two."
He tugged her hand.
"Come on, let's go back."
When they hurried around the bend, the couple with the toddler was coming toward them. The parents were slender, Asian American, maybe in their late 30s. The child had both his hands fisted in his father's black hair. Looking at him, the smell of smoke in her nostrils, Natalia felt faint and far away, as if she were observing herself from above. Wyatt stepped into the middle of the path.
"You can't go back this way. There's a fire, and it's cut off the trail. I think we should all just go back to the falls."
The dad scowled.
"What are you talking about? Are you joking?"
Wyatt raised his empty hands.
"Why would we joke about that? Look at all the smoke in the air. The fire's just a few hundred yards up the trail."
"And Trask is really tired." The mom shook her head. She had a spiky black haircut.
"We just came through there like an hour ago, and there wasn't any fire," the dad said. "Maybe we could still get through."
Wyatt shook his head.
"It's moving pretty fast."
But it was like the couple hadn't heard him. Without another word, the man walked past them. When the edge of the child carrier knocked against Natalia, he didn't apologize. More slowly, the woman followed. Natalia exchanged a look with Wyatt. "Maybe we should go after them?"
"They'll figure it out in a minute."
"But what about their kid?" The memory of her little brother swamped her. To steady herself, she rested her palm on the rough bark of a tree trunk. Her therapist, Dr. Paris, called it anchoring to the real world.
"I'm sure they won't really risk it once they see it. They just need to wrap their heads around reality."
Natalia and Wyatt started back up the hill. It was an effort to keep lifting her boots. They had worked until 2:30 and then driven the hour out here. At least now that she couldn't see the fire, her fear wasn't as paralyzing. The authorities were probably already redirecting one of those helicopters. Maybe she and Wyatt would even be rescued by one. When they went around another turn in the trail, 4 people from the falls were coming toward them. In the lead was the dog. Natalia eyed it nervously. She didn't like the fact that it was off its leash. Dogs could bite or snap or otherwise be unpredictable. Its ears stood straight up, and its blue eyes were a striking contrast to its flat brown coat with a white splash on the chest. 30 feet behind the dog was the college-age couple it belonged to, the tall, skinny white guy in cutoffs with the leash draped around his neck like a scarf, and the Hispanic girl in flip-flops, a blue and white beach towel draped over her bare shoulders. Behind them was an African-American man with graying hair. He was holding the hand of a lighter-skinned boy who looked about 8. Wyatt stepped into the middle of the path and raised his hands.
"Hey, guys, I'm sorry, but we can't get out this way. There's a fire about a half-mile back." "What? A forest fire?"
The older man wrapped one arm around the boy. He pulled him close, ignoring the kid's attempts to squirm away.
"Really?"
The girl's eyes went wide.
"Blue."
Her boyfriend patted his thigh, and the dog came to his side. He snapped on the leash. Wyatt pointed the way they had come.
"We're not fire experts, but we figured we'd be safest by the water. If I climb up above the falls, I think I might be able to get cell service. Then I could ask 911 what to do."
This time there wasn't any argument or discussion, just a hurried push to get back to where they had started. When they reached Basin Falls, there were only 3 people left. The sweaty white guy was finishing up the last of his Gatorade. An older white woman wearing a tan sun hat and an old-fashioned pack was sitting on a boulder, watching the falls. And the dark-haired guy who had passed them on their way out was facing toward the trail, staring up at the sky. None of them were near each other.
"Hey, people! Listen up!"
Wyatt waved his arms, but it was difficult to compete with the sight and sound of falling water. Natalia slid off her backpack and found the gear she had bought at REI. She pulled out the cord holding a bright orange whistle and put it to her lips. Even over the rush of the waterfall, the sound was piercing. The other people's heads turned. Wyatt put his hands around his mouth and shouted,
"Hey, you guys! There's a fire blocking the trail!"
He pointed at the top of the falls.
"I'm going to get up higher and see if I can get cell service."
He headed toward a faint line of trampled brush that led to the top of the falls. Natalia followed, her stomach twisting. At the bottom of the slope was a sign bolted to a tree. The top had the word "No" in big white letters on a red background. In full, it read, "No cliff jumping or diving into Basin Falls. 3 people have died trying. $500 fine."
"Do you really think it's safe to go up there?"
she asked as he scrambled up on a boulder. He looked over his shoulder.
"Don't worry, I have no plans to try diving. Want to come up with me?"
"I'll just slow you down,"
Natalia said, which was true, but not the truth. She was afraid of heights.
"Just promise you'll be careful."
"Of course. But don't worry, I'll be fine."
Wyatt started to clamber up the rocky hillside.
Her heart in her mouth, Natalia watched him go.
Chapter 4. Extreme Danger. 7:23 p.m. As Natalia watched, Wyatt scrambled up the steep hill. He was in the full sun, but down here in the shadows by the water, the light was changing as the sun got lower in the sky. Long slanted rays revealed that smoke was beginning to reach them. How long until the fire did? To calm herself, she took a deep breath, regretting it when she tasted the smoke. Around her, the other people were gradually coalescing, all of them looking up, focused on Wyatt. Before joining them, the guy who had passed them on the way in tossed the bottle cap he'd been carrying into the water. Natalia didn't bother to hide her disgusted look. What a jerk! All those cargo pockets, and he couldn't be bothered to pack out a single bottle cap? The bottle it belonged to had probably been tossed into the bushes along the way here. He met her glare with narrowed eyes. Now he challenged her.
"Are you sure there's a fire? I was just through there like a half hour ago, and I didn't see any fire."
"Well, there's one now."
She waved at the particles floating in the sunbeams. "You can see the smoke in the air." The girl in the flip-flops pointed at Wyatt. Her nails were painted purple. "So that's your boyfriend up there?" We work together at an ice cream shop in Portland." Natalia gave the other girl a weak smile. "This was kind of our first date." "Some first date?" She rolled her eyes. "My name's Beatrice."
"Natalia."
She pointed up the hill.
"And that's Wyatt."
With her thumb, Beatrice gestured back at the guy with the dog, who was standing a little apart from everyone. "My boyfriend, Marco, and the dog's named Blue." Knuckling the top of Blue's head, Marco nodded at them. He was skinny, with a mop of streaked blonde hair. His shorts, with hacked-off legs of different lengths, had clearly once been jeans. Everyone else introduced themselves. The older guy was Daryl, and his grandson was named Zion. AJ was the stocky guy in boots that looked as new as Natalia's. Susan had an old-fashioned pack made of green canvas and gray curls peeking out from her sun hat. The jerk was the last one to give his name. Jason. Wyatt was nearly at the top when suddenly his left foot slipped on some loose rocks. As Natalia gasped, he caught himself. "He looks like he knows what he's doing, honey." Susan said. Natalia wasn't reassured. This was real life. If Wyatt fell, he could be badly hurt, maybe even killed. If he broke his back or even a leg, how much could she really do with her first aid kit? The Red Cross class she took every summer was predicated on what to do in the few minutes you might have to wait for an ambulance. Wyatt finally reached the top. He turned and waved. Even though he was a good 10 feet from the edge, Natalia wished he would take a few more steps back. After pulling out his phone, he extended his arm and turned in a circle, squinting. He slowed, moved the phone toward him, frowned, stopped. Then he seemed to have found a small, sweet spot. He began tapping on the screen, still at arm's length. Beatrice clapped. "He must have a signal!" Gingerly, Wyatt tilted the phone so the speaker was closest to him. The rush of the falls made it impossible to hear anything he said. He listened with his head cocked, nodded a couple of times, and spoke very little. Finally, he turned in the direction of the parking lot, shading his eyes with his free hand. But when he tried to relay what he saw, it was clear from his frustrated expression and how he moved the phone that he had lost the signal. After a few minutes of trying and failing to find it again, Wyatt pocketed the phone and started back. Before he was even halfway down, people were shouting questions.
"What did they say?"
AJ yelled. Daryl cupped his hands around his mouth.
"When are they coming?"
Wyatt held up one hand to tell them to wait. Finally, he reached the last big boulder. Rather than trying to climb down, he crouched and jumped, landing with bent knees. Okay. He held up both hands as more questions flew.
"Just let me talk. 911 patched me through to the sheriff's department. They already knew about the fire, but now they're alerting the Forest Service that we're here. They said we should wait for further instructions." "Wait? Is that such a good idea?"
AJ gestured at the increasingly murky air.
"It's already getting smokier. What if the fire gets here before they do?" "I took a look while I was up there," Wyatt said. "It's still maybe 3/4 of a mile away."
"Could you see that couple who kept going?" Natalia asked. It was hard to breathe when she thought of Trask's chubby hands clutched in his father's hair.
He shook his head. "But there's a lot of tree cover, and there are breaks in the fire. Maybe they found a way through. If that fire gets a wind behind it," Daryl said, "it'll eat up that 3/4 of a mile before you know it."
His sunglasses made his expression unreadable, but his words made Zion press his face into his grandpa's round belly. Wyatt's mouth twisted.
"They said that one problem is that the best way out is already blocked by the Cougar Creek fire."
"How are we supposed to get instructions anyway?" Beatrice asked. "None of us can get a signal down here, and you barely got one up there." AJ pointed.
"Look!"
4 helicopters appeared on the horizon. The 3 largest carried giant cloth buckets. One by one they released their contents. 2 were filled with what must have been fire retardant. It was the bright red of fresh blood. The 3rd dropped what looked like water. 3 helicopters trying to put out the flames. Not the one Wyatt had thought might do the trick. But that was when they'd first spotted the fire. How far had it spread since? Would 3 be enough? But maybe it didn't even matter, because the 4th helicopter, the smallest and the only one without a bucket, was buzzing closer. With the rest, Natalia jumped and cheered, shouted and waved. She wasn't worried the pilot didn't see them. It was just a way of channeling her anxiety. Soon they would be safe. The chopper hovered directly above them. Leaves and even small sticks began to rise in the air, swirling in the wind created by the turning blades. Beatrice wrinkled her nose.
"Do you think it can hold all of us?"
She had to raise her voice to be heard over the rotors.
"If not, Zion should be on the first trip out,"
Daryl said.
"And Susan, maybe you too."
"But it's getting dark," AJ said.
"Can that thing even land at night? What if it can only take one trip?"
Instead of landing, the helicopter began to lift higher. As the group fell into stunned silence, it started to fly away.
"Maybe they're going back to get a bigger one,"
Beatrice said. So there's room for all of us.
A shiver danced across Natalia's skin as she watched the helicopter grow smaller and smaller.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?